Within the space of 1 year, in the Depression, 1933 to 1934, we moved from South Fifth Street to 131 Meserole Street to Siegel Street, then to the end of Siegel Street. I was never told what caused these departures. At our last Siegel Street apartment, the rickety wooden staircase to our 5-room cold water flat turned slightly before reaching the second floor. The 5 of us stood on a landing that faced 2 apartments. The one on the right belonged to us. My mother turned the key, and we were looking into the kitchen that had a gas range, a bathtub with a porcelain cover, a coal stove, and a door leading to the bathroom we would now share with strangers. 1 room to the front overlooked the street, while 4 led to the backyard. We could no longer afford the luxury of steam heat. At that moment, I knew we were no longer the chosen people. Jews had always had steam heat. After my mother fully digested the indignity of having to share a toilet with people of unknown origin, she said, "We're only going to be here a couple of months." Her eyes avoided my father, who stood catatonically, unable to control the events that had brought us to this horrible place. We had traveled from Meserole Street the grand distance of 5 blocks, transporting our personal belongings in shopping bags, the furniture by pushcart. "Let's get unpacked," my mother said. At that moment, 6 years old, going on 7, I wanted to take over. "It's cold in here," my mother said. "We need some heat. Make a fire." The huge black stove stared at us like some monster at feeding time. We'd never had to face one of these before. My father stuffed newspapers into the bell of the stove, then wood, then shiny black chunks of coal. He tossed in a lit match, and in a few seconds smoke filled the apartment, choking us. "Can't you put it out?" my mother shouted. "There's a thing in here someplace," my father said, looking for the damper. Smoke was everywhere. "You picked this place," my mother screamed. "Don't you know how to work the stove?" My brother and sister were crying. I could hear them, even though I couldn't see them. I felt empty inside. I wished I were an orphan. I don't belong to these people. I placed an invisible shield between my ears and the words they said to hurt one another. "Stop crying," I said to Doreen through the smoke. "Everything will be all right." Suddenly the bathroom door opened. A short, middle-aged woman in a dark dress stood in the doorway. "What's wrong?" she said in a thick Italian accent. "I'm your next-door neighbor." She headed straight for the stove. "You know, open the damper," she explained, grabbing a handle on the stove and shoving it forward. "You got a smoke in the whole house. The fire engines are going to come." The smoke stopped pouring out of the stove. "We just moved in and it was cold," my mother said. "We never did this before." The woman looked at us as if we were immigrants who had just landed. "You gotta start slow," she said. "Gotta have patience. Use a little bit of wood, then put the coal down one at a time. Then you got a good fire. You go all night." "Thank you," my mother said. "I'm Bella, this is Willie and our kids. I'm Mrs. Palazzo. My daughter and I live next door. We and you share the same bathroom. There's a lock, see? You want privacy, you just turn it." She pointed to the little screw latches on both doors to the bathroom, hers and ours. "You no sleep in the back room," Mrs. Palazzo said, pointing. "The heat no go back too far. Better you sleep together in one room, near the stove. It's nice and warm." "Thank you," my mother said. "Any time you want something, you call." From that moment, the Palazzos and the Stillas were friends. When she left, we dropped everything and went to sleep, all 5 of us in one bed. Tessie was Mrs. Palazzo's only daughter. She was a Roman beauty in her 20s. Her olive skin and classic features made her seem like a goddess. My mother and Tessie got to be friends. They'd smoke cigarettes together, drink coffee, talk about things. We kids never knew what they were talking about, but it fascinated us. We'd watch them for hours. It was sometime in December, just before Christmas, that we first noticed the lights on a tree blinking on and off in the Palazzo apartment. We could see the lights through the frosted glass of the palazzo's bathroom door, and as it turned out, Tessie could see the silhouette of our faces against the frosted glass. One night, she pulled open the door. "What are you looking at?" she said, as if catching us in some forbidden act. "Your tree," we whispered. "Don't you have one?" she said, peering into our apartment. She saw we didn't. A revelation. A couple of nights later, she knocked on our door and asked my mother if it would be all right to invite the children in to sit under the tree. My mother's face turned white. Arnie, Doreen, and I sat waiting for her answer. My mother looked at the three of us and very quietly said, "I'm sorry. I don't want to offend you, Tessie, but in this house, we don't celebrate Christmas. That's why we don't have a tree. I hope you understand." Tessie stood for a moment, then silently walked back through the bathroom into her apartment. "I hope you kids will understand someday," my mother said to us. We went to bed. A few nights later, while listening to Eddie Cantor on the radio, we heard loud arguing in Tessie's apartment. Lots of crying and cursing. There was a man in the apartment. "Marry you? I wouldn't marry you," we heard Tessie say. "Besides, you're already married, you bum. You're nothing to me." "I love you, Tessie. I'll get a divorce," the man's voice pleaded. "You lied to me, you SOB." "But I love you." "I don't love you," Tessie said. "Even if I'm carrying your child. I don't love you. Understand?" "Make her understand," the man begged Tessie's mother. "I'm good. I make a good dollar. Tell her not to treat me this way." As the argument grew more intense, we turned up the radio to blot it out so as not to be eavesdropping. We couldn't help but notice through the frosted glass the shadows of Tessie, Mrs. Palazzo, and a small man moving frantically back and forth in front of the Christmas tree. "Don't you understand?" Tessie screamed again. "I'll have the baby, but not you." The man said, "I won today. I rode a winner at the track. I'm giving you everything." "I don't want your fucking money," Tessie screamed. All of us in our own apartment forgot Eddie Cantor. We were now glued to the drama going on next door. "Okay," the man said. "If you don't take the money, I'm flushing it down the toilet." There was a silence, and then Tessie's bathroom door swung open. We could make out the figure of the little man through the frosted glass on our own bathroom door as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of bills. I could see him waving them over his head as if it was some bomb he was about to throw. There was another silence. Then the sound of the toilet chain. I could visualize the bills falling into the toilet. Without saying a word, I yanked open our bathroom door and screamed, "Take the money, Tessie! Take the money!" as the bills went swirling to a watery grave.